You're listening to the Two Tongues Podcast. And now your hosts, Kyle and Chris.
Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of the Two Tongues Podcast, where today I have a special guest, author Brian Cranley, author of The Call of Wonder. It's not quite visible in the frame there, but there you have it. Brian, I want to jump right in because I know we have a lot to cover, and I have tons of questions that I'm really anxious to run by you. But I wanted to say, before we just jump in here, that you and I have a bit in common, and I just thought I would throw it out right at the beginning. Clearly, we both have an interest in philosophy and religion, so I don't bump into many of us, so I'm happy to have you on. We're both girl dads, so you know. And you have a sentence from your book that said, "I believe in Christianity, and I prefer the more ancient expressions of the faith." And I couldn't agree more. I'm a Christian myself. I don't really harp on it too much on the podcast because we talk about world religions and we go very deep. But there's all sorts of interesting correlations. And then the gist of the book is about wonder. And you mentioned sources of wonder for you in your life, and I want to kind of open with that. But you talked about deep space and cosmology and nature and things like that. And I've always felt that way since I was a child. In fact, I have a photo I want to show you really quickly. I don't know if you've seen before, but have you ever seen this Alex Gray painting?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, it happens to be called Wonder.
Oh wow!
And it's just this this beautiful anatomical drawing of this boy staring up at the moon and you know, the expanse of space and the stars, and you just get the feeling looking at this picture of what this boy for the first time is just expanding his mind and his heart to the possibilities of the infinite and the things that does to a person's soul. So anyway, I wanted to start there. You know, I don't know if you have any opening remarks on wonder, but I was really hoping you could give us a little bit about your background in the book just to kind of kick it off.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I was listening to, some of your podcast episodes and agree that we have a lot in common. And there's not a lot of people that you can talk about all these random topics with. And so I was a little bit worried when I wrote the book because it is crossing many different fields. And I personally don't have a PhD in any one of them. So I have like a master's in divinity and a bachelor's in biomedical engineering. But I just personally like the topics, kind of like yourself. This is stuff that's fascinating to me personally. And so I wanted to write the book because I felt like I came across a new angle at looking at faith and science and that discussion. And I used the experience of wonder, like you talked about. The Call of Wonder is the title. And I used the one thing I knew that I wanted in the title was the word wonder. And this is not, my idea or anything, but it's the idea that it's the shared experience of scientists, philosophers, and theologians. And so in particular, like when you approach God with your mind and your intellect. And so I wanted that word wonder because I think I'm kind of an experience type guy. I want to help people experience what I have. And so that word encompasses an experience. It encompasses, the inquiry of philosophy. Socrates talking about wisdom begins in wonder. It encompasses the experience of encountering the infinite, like you just talked about in that painting, where you encounter God as the infinite one in your intellect, which we can talk about more, the idea of mystery and the idea of miracles and just some fascinating things I've been thinking about since writing the book. But yeah, wonder, and stop me if I'm talking too long, but wonder, what I talk about in chapter 1 is authentic wonder, which is those experiences like experiencing the largeness of realities outside yourself, like the vastness of space. And I think in one of your podcasts, you talked about realism, the philosophy of realism. Do these things actually exist? Which is kind of the whole point of the first half of the book. So encountering these big realities, whether it's biological life, deep space, or the human mind as sort of looked at, from without, just sort of observing the human mind at work. And these things give you the sense of wonder that's different than modern social media with these crazy titles, that give you a dopamine hit for a second, and different than CGI movies. It's a different experience. And so I'm trying to hone in on that authentic wonder that comes from philosophy, theology, and science, which I think ultimately comes from God, which is, spoiler alert, that's the end of the book. It ultimately comes from God. So yeah, I don't know, just some cool thoughts.
No, I love it. I kind of got the impression reading the book that what you were doing was saying, look, there is there's an intellectual avenue towards God. And people have ignored that in the last 100 years or so, because of materialism and all these sorts of things that have crept into the zeitgeist and taken over. We don't, a good, rational atheist scientist is not going to consider some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And I just wonder, these people that I'm talking about here aren't reading Plato. They're not reading Aristotle. They're not reading, certainly not reading Aquinas, some of the things that you've talked about. So I don't know that these people are getting, I would agree that they're familiar with the arguments for the existence of God that maybe Aquinas would make. But there's all sorts of atheists that poo-poo those ideas ad nauseum on online and so forth. And I just think that so many people miss the opportunity to do what you're doing in this book, which is to introduce people to this logical, rational series of progressions that build upon one another and lead to this idea of God that doesn't require revelation. It doesn't require any woo-woo, supernatural, hippy-dippy, anything. It's just strictly rational, and leading you to this same goal. And I don't think many people do that anymore. And so your book, I think, outlines it very well. And if I can just compliment you for a minute here, if you were going to sit down and read Plato as a normal person, first of all, the dialogues, there's so many dialogues, and it would take you for absolutely forever. And what you would glean from that is going to be different for everybody. And then Aristotle's a whole other, bag of worms beyond that. I just don't think that ordinary people can digest all of this and come to any, conclusions. What you've done is sort of pared down great thinkers. I'm going to focus on Aristotle a bit towards the middle because we'll get into that in just a second. But from Plato to Aristotle, talking about things like forms and the unmoved mover, and just going step by step through this. So I don't have to know what Aristotle said in his Politics. I don't need to know what he said in any of these other various writings. I can just look at your book at sort of these key points, these key ideas, and kind of build towards this idea of God. And so I wonder what you have to say about that.
Man, well, I'm extremely honored that you just said that, because I was trying so hard to do that. And, my editors will tell you I sent it back probably 16 times because I personally have a very hard time reading Aristotle in the original. You pick up a page and it's a lecture note from someone who's so intelligent that every word they say is, just very specific and very, scrupulous almost. It's very hard to read. Aquinas, gets hard after a few pages, all of them, even Plato's, like you said, there's so many dialogues. And so couple that with the reason why I wrote the book was because working with so many friends that are in the medical field and sort of they're well-educated people, and none of them have ever gotten this education. And I would never have gotten the education. I never would have read any of these books unless I hadn't gone to seminary, and that was the required education, was 2 years of philosophy. And so, reflecting on that 15 years later, I keep thinking to myself, why do I have so much trouble not believing in God? I love listening to atheist arguments. I read A Universe from Nothing by Krauss. I've read Dawkins' Blind Watchmaker. I love the ideas. I love the discussion, but I was like, why can I not believe in God? One, it's my personal experience, and I think that's kind of the final decider for a lot of people, for or against. But other than that, it's this logical conversation. I just can't get these arguments out of my head once they're in there. And so I wanted to offer that education to people in like 4 chapters if I could. And so what I did was, this is like the classic Western education that we've lost, but it's basically Plato to Aristotle to Augustine to Aquinas, and their specific thoughts of causality, the unmoved mover, the forms, those things that lead to how we define or how we describe our theology in Christianity, or at least how the ancients did. And that I want to bring that conversation back. It is going on in places like your podcast, and I want to, bring more people into that because it's so mentally fulfilling to hear the ideas and decide what you believe. But if you don't know them and you just try to go to all of Plato, all of Aristotle, all of Aquinas, and all of Augustine, you're going to be reading for the next, 10 years before you come out. So
Yeah.
tried to summarize it.
No, I think you did a really great job, and obviously it goes beyond that because we're talking about life science, we're talking about cosmology, lots of scientific topics in there as well. But I wanted to ask you because it just popped into my mind, the feedback that you've got from the book so far, and the people that you've spoken to as you're out promoting it. How successful have you been in convincing these either atheists or people that haven't encountered these sorts of arguments before? How convincing has it been? What has the impact been? Are you seeing people opening up their eyes and considering these ideas? Because again, they don't have recourse to revelation or anything supernatural. They're just following the reason and logic that they value so much. What is the feedback been?
It's a great question. I just launched it August 5th. So it's been 1 month out. I've given it to 2 of my atheist buddies and they're reading it. They haven't gotten back to me yet. I'd say I don't have enough feedback yet to start the conversations with those people and go deeper. I'd say it's getting, mixed reviews. Some people really don't like it. Some people really don't like the philosophy. And I'd say some evangelical Christians don't like that I included Islam. That's a hot button for a lot of people. And I get it. When I was including it, I was aware that it might rub some people the wrong way, but because I'm trying to go by logic and reason, there's this thread of this conversation in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they all follow the same sort of logical arguments for God and the divine attributes. And then our theology is different, but I wanted to include them. But I would say right now, the best reaction is coming from believers who never heard this before. And it offers maybe a strengthening of belief for the idea of God. But I'm excited to hear from atheists, both online and in reviews and in person. So we'll see.
I'll be a captive audience and reviewing that feedback because I'd like to hear it as well. Let's see. All right. I wanted to read a couple of things here. These are probably out of chronology in the book, but let me just read these two
Sure.
sentences here. You said in the book, "I felt wonder for a long time while learning about natural biology and deep space. It wasn't until I heard God described by the ancients in logical terms that I began to experience wonder in the world of faith." Then you say, "Many of us end up believing faith and science are incompatible and feel forced to choose between one or the other. What ancient wisdom shows us, however, is quite the opposite. Plato and Aristotle approached the divine from a scientific mindset, using observation, logic, complex reasoning, and debate. They arrived at the need for a necessary existence to explain the world around them." So that's sort of a recap of maybe everything we've discussed up to this point. What the book is trying to do, but this idea of encountering wonder in the logic, again, outside of revelation, but just in this sort of, I don't know if you could call it secular. I don't think that's fair, but outside of a religious tradition and leading in this direction. So I thought that was brilliant. A good way of maybe setting the stage for the rest of our conversation. There was 2 other things that I thought I would ask you about on the onset, because as I was reading the book, there was a little blurb in there where you were giving I guess I'll call it like a scientific retelling of the Eden story.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that, so when you're opening the book and you're talking about how scientists and religious people can reconcile their ideas, the key there being allegory and analogy, that kind of thing. And then you do this exercise with the Eden story. So I thought that was brilliant. And I wonder how conservative evangelical type Christians will take it. But I wonder if you can just recap this for us and tell us why you chose to do that, because I think it was brilliant. But I'll stop talking.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that's one of my favorite parts in the book, but also one of the last parts I put in because I almost didn't put it in because I knew it would be controversial. So I put that preface sentence before the story, like, get ready, you're going to experience some cognitive dissonance with this one, because I still experience it, but I think it's really beautiful to think about as well. Do you want me to recap the story real quick?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So basically, I retell the Adam and Eve story in light of what we know from science and evolution. And in my personal faith belief system, Catholicism, they allow for a range of belief where you can believe in creation I guess you could believe in literal 6-day creation. You can believe in old earth creation, where Genesis is figuratively talking about eons or billions of years. Or you can believe in like a theistic evolution. And so the caveat there is you can believe that the body evolved, but you have to believe the soul was created uniquely by God at, just like we do at conception. And so each baby has a soul created for that life, but the body came from the parents. And so I've been thinking about this idea for 20 years. How could Adam and Eve and evolution work together? And the only thing I can come up with is this story where I write basically these hominins that lived 250 to 300,000 years ago, which are the cavemen that we normally think about. There's Neanderthals, there's also all sorts of Homo groups, but Homo sapiens, they're living 250, 300,000 years ago. And at some point, one of these was human and one of them was not. And so it's a story about if a child was born to hominins that are animal without a human soul, but he is the first human, which is Adam, then it would almost be like a virgin birth, but one level down in being. So instead of from humanity to God, we have from sort of animal to humanity. And so I tell the story of the child wouldn't know it at first. He'd be raised with a tribe or I'm not sure what you would call the group, but a group of hominins that are, maybe hunter-gatherers. But then he would show around 7 or 8 this exceptional mental ability, which we see in humanity. And he recognizes beauty in the world, and he recognizes this presence, an invisible presence that guides him, that's with him, that, provides joy. And I think I put a line in there. There's a garden of peace inside his soul, which is the idea that the Garden of Eden is within you when you're living in that right relationship with God. And so he's this first human. And then I have him building, he's sort of building these structures with his hands and painting on cave walls like we see in ancient archaeology. And then one day, another group of hominins pass by and they inspect his dwelling. And at the back of the group, there's a female. And instead of passing by, she's staring at him because she too has a soul. And, they meet for the first time and the presence sort of brings them together. So it's a beautiful sort of retelling of the garden, although, a lot of people, it rubs people the wrong way, which is fine. I'm okay if it's not true, obviously. And I say that this is just speculation. I'm just kind of putting it together, but I think it's fascinating to think about and discuss.
Absolutely. And I got chills while you were telling that story towards the
me
end.
Too. Me too. It gets me every time.
Just imagining how you would feel being that first true human being living amongst lesser creatures, feeling alienated, and then how you would feel encountering somebody else like you and recognizing that. And I don't know, it sends chills up and down my arms. But the idea here is that the biblical story is some sort of an analogy that you can choose to consider literally if you want to, but if you aren't, one to accept revelation and take the Bible literally, you can be as scientific minded as you want. You can accept all the things that we've learned through natural science and still imagine that story in the Garden of Eden is real in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know, Brian, if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson or not. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And what he does so well when he talks about the Bible is he basically proposes, how might this be true? How might this story be real? And all you have to do is imagine, okay, what would it need to be for this story to be real? And analogies and allegory are an important component in that, but it is possible to do that. And the way you did it with the Adam and Eve story was great. I loved it.
I appreciate it. And I would say one more thing. People say, well, why do you take Genesis as allegory and not the Gospels? How do you know what to take as allegory? And that is a great question, to which my answer is every book in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, is a different type of book. The Gospels are more like obviously an eyewitness account, and then Jesus teaches in parables. So when he's teaching in a parable. The Psalms were liturgical songs. It's a song book. It's just a different type of book. And Genesis, I talk about, is ancient Near Eastern Mesopotamian poetry style mythology, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It just means the truth is packaged in a different type of book. And so I think Pope Benedict said that literalism is a type of slavery to the mind, and that Jesus will free you from that. It's okay to let Genesis literal, like hardcore literal translation go, and realize that he can still communicate truth through a poetic form.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
While we're on the same subject, one of the other things that struck me powerfully when I was reading it was when you were talking about what the ancient Greek understanding would be when these ancient Greek philosophers had these really well thought out systems of philosophy who encounter the Bible for the first time, and they're reading Genesis, and it says that the world was created without form and void.
Did you like that?
Oh man, I loved it. I loved it. I never considered that before.
Really?
You know,
I kind of came up with that while I was writing. I was like, oh yeah, they talked about prime matter. They talked about what would they have thought if they saw the Big Bang cosmology that we know now. That'd be cool. But it's funny because nobody mentions things like that who read it, I guess, unless you're a philosopher who knows.
Sure. No, it's brilliant. I mean, I love the poetry of Genesis. Genesis is my favorite book of the Bible, you know, bar none. But I have a sort of a traditional Judeo-Christian understanding of the story, even the poetic, you know, if I take it as poetry, which I sort of do. But the idea that an ancient Greek would read that and say, in the beginning, you know, the world was without form, and that has a specific meaning in Greek philosophy.
Yeah, very specific. Exactly. They would have known exactly what they were saying. Yeah.
But and it's not clear that would be the same understanding as a Jew at the same time. They would, you know. So the idea here is Christianity seems to have borrowed a great deal of this understanding from Greek philosophy, adapted it to the religion, and it's enriched the tradition tremendously. But again, if a Jew's reading that and they see that the world was created without form, I don't know exactly what that means to a traditional Jewish mind, but to a Greek mind, it has a very specific meaning.
Well, you have a great point here, because what I presented in there is that we're using the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So a Hebrew would not have read without form. I think it was more like chaos or something. It's a different, yeah. Chaos or order out of chaos or something. And so it's in the Greek translation that we get the Greek understanding of philosophy, which is so influenced Christianity, but most modern Christians don't realize it. And I think Jews and Hebrews would have thought of it different, which is fine. I just love that the Greek philosophical system gives you this method of interpreting scripture in a much deeper level than you would consider. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing out that point.
Let's do this. Let's just run through this experiment while everyone's listening here. So it's to a Christian ear. If the ancient Greek philosopher sees this phrase that the world was without form, what do they mean by form, and what would it mean for reality to be without form?
You ready?
Yes. I'm born ready, buddy. Let's go.
Okay. I'm going to really quickly summarize the forms. So the Platonic forms, this is Plato's big idea, is that the universal, so when you look at two different horses, your mind knows what a horse is because he believes there's this ideal horse that's a perfect form existing in this third realm. And so every time we look at a horse, that perfect form is helping like create the horse or give it its being, and it's also giving us the knowledge of what a horse is. So this is called the problem of universals. Aristotle took the forms and he said, no, Plato, they're not floating around in a third realm. They exist only in the thing itself. So yes, the form exists, the universal form exists within the horse, but it also exists within your mind. Then that's the Aristotelian forms. Then scholasticism, which is Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, they took the Aristotelian idea of the forms and said, well, wait a minute. If all humanity died out and the forms were no longer in your mind, where do they have this existence so that if humanity came back, we would probably discover the same forms again? And Augustine said, well, these universal forms exist in the divine intelligence, this sort of infinite intelligence. And that's where our minds are participating in the divine mind who knows all possible worlds, who knows what numbers and the laws of physics are. All these invisible realities, what truth, beauty, courage are, these invisible realities exist somewhere. And scholastic realism says they exist in the mind of God. And I think that's fascinating because Philo from Alexandria in the Jewish tradition thought the same thing. And then Augustine developed it further and Aquinas took it further. But it's just these ideas of where these universals exist. I guess it's the argument of realism or universals. So then we talk about if you had a creation apart
Brian,
from
sorry
form.
to interrupt you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to interject. There's two quotes that came to my mind immediately. Maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't, but there's a quote by Pindar that says, all things, what does it say? It says something like, all things emerge from the mind of Zeus.
Yeah. I
And-
heard your podcast on that. Yeah.
Oh, you did?
I was
And then
thinking this the whole time. I was like, yeah, this is that train of thought that has been going on
Yes.
for thousands of years. Where do these things exist?
And we can point way across the ocean to the Lakota Sioux, and they believe their great spirit they call Wakonde, and they say
Yep.
the same thing. In the beginning, all things were in the mind of Wakonde.
In the mind.
So in the
Yeah.
mind of God. Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry. I know I stumbled you there.
No, it's beautiful. So the idea that the first line of Genesis, or without form and void, in Greek, that means there is no matter that exists apart from form for them. Everything has, even if it's a rock or mineral, it has some sort of form. And so the idea of matter apart from form was actually a hypothetical state that both Plato and Aristotle just sort of thought about and taught, this hypothetical state that doesn't actually exist. What would it be like? And I love this. Aristotle says it would be pure potentiality. So it's this substance that has the potential. It's just pure potential. It can become anything and everything. And you look at God, and God is the exact opposite. God is pure actuality. There is nothing for him to become. He is pure actuality. And so then you're thinking, well, the Big Bang, what is this radiation state where everything is this perfect unity of radiation, mass, energy. It's all one and the same. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's pure potential to become, and it becomes the stars, the galaxies, eventually Earth, life, and us.
Chills up my arms again, Brian.
Yeah,
Chills up my arms again. Yes, potentiality. It's so funny. I hate to jump too far ahead because I want to get to this, but I've avoided Aristotle in the past because I thought he was not mystical enough.
Yeah.
So I favored Plato for that reason.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I read your book and I got to that section about Aristotle saying that if God is this cosmic mind, for lack of a better phrase, then what God is doing is contemplating itself. Contemplation, this self-contemplation idea. So I'm going to put a pin in that because I was kind of hoping to save that till last, but my mind is just going 1,000 different directions here.
Yeah, I'm getting chills because I'm remembering where I was sitting in class when I first heard that. I was like, wow, that sounds a lot like, the Trinity theology. So we can talk about that though.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to say this, like, when I was working on getting you on the show here,
yeah,
I knew that you had this medical science background and that you went to divinity school later, which I thought was an interesting, obviously, experience. Not very few people do that. But there was these characters that come to mind that I always love when I encounter them, that are scientists, but they're mystical. So people like Alfred Wallace, who co-wrote the theory of evolution with Darwin, who became a spiritualist in his older years, and he was discredited by the scientific community as a consequence. People like Tesla. I think about Isaac Newton doing alchemy. I think about people like Sir Humphrey Davy. I don't know if you've encountered Sir Humphrey Davy, but just a whole bunch of these people that are these some of the most interesting thinkers that I've ever encountered, and that is dependent on this openness to both science and religion, and you just don't get those sorts of ideas without somebody open to them both. And so you are one of those people, obviously, and I wanted to ask you what the origin of that is, because for me, I felt this way since I was a child. You didn't go to divinity school until much later. And you said in the book that you didn't come around to this feeling of wonder and awe in religion until you encountered the philosophy. And I'm just curious, what's the origin story for Brian going down this path?
Well, yeah. So, gosh, that's a great question. There was a lady in my church who was sort of like a Pentecostal type, very spiritual gifts, very prophetic word, and she would, pray over people and talk. She was the first one that really taught me, look, God can speak to you through anything. He doesn't have to speak to you only through the Bible or only while you're sitting at church. He will talk to you through regular people, through the secular world. I mean, truth is truth is truth is truth, wherever it comes from. And, you got to kind of discern how much of it's true and whatever. But that idea, it kind of sat with me. And then I read Thomas Aquinas, and I read about his life. And so Thomas, people don't realize this, but he was, a lot of people did not like what he was doing because he was taking pagan Aristotle, who he absolutely loved, and weaving him into the Christian faith. And people today still don't like what he did. But I started to realize these great thinkers who stand the test of time have this in common, that they bring fields together. A lot of these great thinkers like Averroes and Avicenna from Islam and Philo and all those guys, all the guys in my book are like these polyglots. Like they're like lawyers and doctors and astronomers and philosophers, and they write on like everything. They don't write on one topic like we do today. I think over specialization is becoming a problem in America because, we're so specialized on whatever field we're in that, gosh, this book, have you read Range by David Epstein?
I have not.
So it's all about this idea that over specializing narrows your focus at times. And so it's good to bring in people, experts from outside your field. But in my own personal life, I'm thinking, man, I just want to become an expert in multiple fields. Instead of getting a PhD in one topic, I would rather get a master's level in 5 topics, because then you start seeing the connections between the fields. Reality is one complete whole in God. And so truth is the same. And to find the connections is now kind of where I get my wonder.
I love it. I love it. All right, let's see here. I want to go to, here's one for you. What do you think can be gained by promoting or reconciling science and religion? What do you think the scientists can benefit from? What do you think the religious thinkers can benefit from by reconciling these systems of ideas specifically?
Yeah. Well, I'll start answering that by talking about what I'm seeing now are the 4 conversations in the Christian movement of, you have materialist atheist on one side, which is everything's material. There is no God. Everything will be explained through scientific, formulas and the material world. Then you have the young earth creationists, which are very literal Genesis. We take the word of God as exactly true. And so science is lying to us, or somehow science is deceptive. And so these are the loud outside, I would say, minorities still, even though maybe materialist atheist is growing. In the middle, you have like young earth creation, which is the idea that God created sort of plant life separate, animal life separate, humanity separate, but they allow for evolution within that specific smaller subset. And then you have theistic evolution, which is kind of where I'm leaning, which is God used the process of evolution to create, and that everything derived from one single cell, universal common ancestor. So I'm leaning that direction, but I'm kind of more interested in that middle. But you have some real problems with materialism. I mean, you still can't really explain creation from nothing. You can't really explain the almost infinite cataclysm between us and the second smartest animal, like how human intelligence works. It's just such a huge leap for the argument that it's a more complex, larger brain structure. Like it just doesn't move linearly, even though, the biology sort of does. It's tough. And then we still can't create a living cell from non-living matter. And I don't know if we will or not, but those 3 sort of, I call those the miracles of science, where they look natural, but there's also something unexplained. And so I think materialist atheism will gain from this conversation by trying to explain these sort of the mysteries where science can't quite get there. And then I think it helps the other side, because I'm kind of Aristotelian in the sense we should be grounded in the real world outside. And I love that science, authentic science, just looks at what is in front of you, measures it, says, here it is. And so I like that attitude too. And I think people of faith can benefit from being grounded in the sciences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a tremendous amount of sort of doom and like the materialist atheists. I don't know if you've encountered these antinatalists and these various groups in social media. Oh, you're looking at me like you haven't heard it, and I hate to be the one to introduce you to it, but
Tell me.
There's a whole group of these materialist atheist people, mostly young people online, that consider themselves what they call them antinatalists. They're people that believe because the world is ultimately meaningless, because everything boils down to physics and motion, and that's it, that there's really no point in life, and life creates suffering. It's just hand in hand. So it's sort of like a twisted Buddhist narrative that life is suffering, and because it hits pointless, it would be better if there weren't life. So these people say, they're all very suicidal. They think you shouldn't have children. They think human population collapse would be the best thing for the planet. It's just very depressing. And these sorts of ideas are very prevalent among materialist atheist types. And I think that's something that could change if they were open to some of these ideas.
Yeah.
If a materialist atheist scientist who doesn't believe that God is a possible entity or being or what have you is open to that idea, then perhaps they could have some meaning in their lives and have reasons to be less depressed and nihilistic. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate there's a little bit of authenticity there, that I have often thought if materialist atheism is true, then then it seems like antinatalism is a viable opinion. If it's all suffering, nothing has meaning, that just doesn't explain 99% of people's human experience. Like, yeah, we go through depression and suffering, but we also go through joy, and we also go through love and beauty. Beauty's a really hard one to combat. I mean, what are these things if we all experience them universally? What are they if all it is materialism? Yeah, I kind of understand the idea there, but yeah, that's exactly who I wrote the book for, because sometimes they've never heard the rational side of the arguments for God. And I think that kind of speaks their language, maybe.
Yeah, I think it does. There's also some kind of hypocrisy that comes to my mind, is like, you have a scientist who's interested in exploring the world, and they want knowledge. They value knowledge and discovery and things like that. But if you live in a meaningless world and you're just a speck of dust in the void, what difference does it make? Why do you care? Why do you want to know? Why do you value anything? So it's just strange,
Yeah, I mean, we could go on for another hour on that exact sentence right there. There's so many things humans take for granted. Like, you don't realize that you have this thirst for knowledge, this wonder to seek more. We just do it. And, we claim there's nothing infinite drawing us onward. Or, we all talk about acting rightly and being good, whether you're atheist or not. Like Ryan Holiday, I think he's atheist. He's writing a book series on the virtues. How do you even have that conversation if there is no standard of goodness in the world? There's nothing you're really measuring it against. How is it not just pure utilitarianism? And why do we care so much if someone gets murdered? We shouldn't care that much. It shouldn't matter that much if there is no God or no infinite being or no source of goodness. It just doesn't make sense with our everyday reality. And I think we just live under these assumptions that this is normal, but I think it's our soul reacting to the reality of God in the world that, causes all these things. And I love that you brought up these natalists that, are suicidal, because I was listening to Alex O'Connor, that YouTuber, great channel. Love that channel. He was talking about Descartes, and when Descartes arrived at, I think therefore I am, or I doubt therefore I am, right? He was doubting everything in his life. Before he gets to that point, and I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say this, like he says in the section before that point that his life has become a mess. Like, everything has become terrible. And I remember thinking, that is what happens when you force doubt of everything that you experience, when you force doubt of reality, which he was doing as an experiment, I understand, but people live by that sort of the ultimate skeptic, the ultimate doubter. I am always going to doubt whatever is before me. If you live like that, there's actual consequences to the quality of life that you have, which I find fascinating. But to me, it's just another proof that there's a soul there. Yeah, man.
Oh, sorry
Hey,
about that.
no worries.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
All right. So where were we?
We're talking about how doubt, if you live by a philosophy of doubt, then I think it has real consequences on your quality of life. And you can see it in Descartes, but you can also see it in, if you have a materialist, hopeless view of the world, then that naturally leads to depression and anxiety. And so I just something I've noticed, just something I've noticed that I've tried personally not to live in doubt. Like, what do I mean by that? You can trust your senses that what you see is real to a certain degree. You can trust rationality, and also you can trust the findings of science, knowing that
Yeah.
those findings sometimes change.
Brian, before I jump into, because I have some questions on Plato and Socrates that I want to run by you. Before I do, I wonder, like, I don't know if I should do this, if I should try to paraphrase you, or if I should just toss it to you. But I kind of want for the audience just to kind of get a glimpse of some of these ideas that we talked about, and the progression from Plato to Aristotle and so forth. That if we just follow those breadcrumb trails, we find ourselves, face to face with this idea of God, confronting this idea. And it sort of seemed like with Plato, where we encounter these forms and we're forced to admit that there's a reality to things that aren't physical.
Yeah.
So there's something out there that isn't physical. You can call it forms or essences if you want to, but you bring up examples of virtues, courage, and things like that. It's like, that's not a physical thing, but we all agree that exists.
Yeah.
Same thing with abstract ideas like mathematics and physics. We all agree that those things exist, even though they're not physical in the way that the table and chair is. So Plato gives us this rational way of accepting. Okay, there must be things that exist in reality, a component to being that isn't physical.
Yes.
So that opens the door to something bordering on, religious or divine.
Mhm.
And then we get to Aristotle, and we get to this very, very logical, man in Aristotle, who brings up this idea of the unmoved mover, and he's essentially saying that there has to be an existence upon which everything else is based or contingent. And
Mhm.
so this is the person that pushes the first domino. This is the unmoved mover, whatever that is,
Whatever it is.
that thing that's eternal, that everything is based on. So now we must admit that there's some non-physical reality. We must admit that there's some origin or source in the beginning that has the power to have done all of this. Now we're just tiptoeing ever closer to this idea of God. So I know I'm probably leaving things out, but pick it up from there.
No, that's great. Like, so with Plato, the chapter on Plato, the whole idea was to present the first real argument that non-physical things can have real existence. And Plato did that. He provided, obviously he was wrong on a lot of things, but he starts the discussion, and he provides a framework of these forms and then physical things, and then, representations of those things. And then Aristotle takes up the baton, which is also fascinating that he was an actual student of Plato. Like, these major thinkers lived at the exact same time. And so Plato runs with, the first cause argument. I tried to teach people what that is. One of the cosmological arguments, the first cause, the unmoved mover, and so now, sorry, I won't get off on a tangent. So he does three things in Aristotle. He does first cause argument. There needs to be a cause of the world, whatever that is. He takes Plato's forms and puts them in the human mind and in the things themselves. And then he has these sort of stages of being where you have inanimate material, plant life, animal life, human life, and then the divine spheres, because he thought that space rotated around these clear, like Russian stacking dolls. And then from that, you go into how that exact conversation wove into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so many of those thinkers take up the first cause argument. Obviously, that first cause argument, unmoved mover, has been used by Thomas Aquinas. It's been used by, can't remember exactly who did, if it was Maimonides in Judaism. But you can see the conversation carry into the actual creeds of the faiths. And I love that, and then they tease out, because of these things, logically, there must be a first cause, or in Plato's sort of this highest good. Because of these things, that being, whatever it is, must have these attributes. It must be perfectly one and indivisible. It must be non-finite. It must be eternal and not bound by time. Otherwise, all these things, and I explain why. If those things aren't true, then that thing is open to be changing. It might have potentiality, and then it could not be the first mover. And so you go to all these attributes, and then I don't know. I just think it's fascinating how, just that Greek conversation got caught up into the theologies of Christianity, in particular. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's worth focusing on for a second, this idea of the unmoved mover necessarily being unchanging. And so the logic there for those people who are just wanting to look at the rational, logical explanation, the line of thinking here is that if the unmoved mover were changing, that there would be motion preceding. I'm going to fumble all over this on the spot, Brian.
That's okay.
So I don't know if you want to pick up on kind of what I'm stepping in here, but go ahead.
Yeah. So if the unmoved mover changes at all, like moves from place to place, or grows in knowledge, or whatever it is, then there is some potentiality in that being that is not yet actualized. And you can't be the first mover, because the argument is that everything is caused from something that's already actual. So a tree has an acorn. It's already actualized a tree, and it drops an acorn, and then that one grows into a tree. Nothing sort of actualizes itself. That's the whole argument. And so if there's any potentiality in the first mover, they would need something else to actualize that potentiality. And so he arrives in logic at this being that is pure actuality itself. And Aquinas takes it a step further and says, the essence existence, it is pure existence itself. And they talk about the necessary being, and Plato or Plotinus talks about the perfectly one being cannot have any parts. It has to be perfectly one. It has to be completely unchanging, 100% actual, which means he's at all times acting and never passive. And it's from that description, then that's what I build the how to see those attributes in the science in the second half of the book.
See that exactly. So that leads directly into this idea of the image of God, which I love the way you did that.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
I just sort of in my mind, I was focusing on some of the things, not all of them, but some of the things you said, that God is one.
Yep.
That God is infinite / eternal, because I think there's some conflation there between infinity and eternity, and unknowable. Right. And then you go on in the book and you talk about how the major problems in science reflect this same pattern that Aristotle identifies in this unmoved mover. When you look at life, when you look at the cosmos itself, that they are, with our best science today, one, infinite, and unknowable. And I don't want to spill the candy in the lobby and tell everybody all the good stuff in the book, so you go out and buy it, and read it. But it's this. So my hippie mind turns on now, and I just see this sort of fractal pattern that exists at every level of analysis, and it's the reflection of the image of God Himself over and over and over again. I get chills on my arms when I think.
You're giving me chills, man. You're giving me chills, honestly. Yeah. So I can just summarize how the pattern replays for the listeners in the science section, and we can get into it more. But basically, the idea is God is one, means God is indivisible. God is infinite. And I talk about how these are negative knowledge terms. These are more telling us what they're not, what God is not, more than what He is. So He's not bound by any distance or number. And He's also non-physical. He's eternal. So He's outside of time, not apart in time. He's outside of it completely. And He is unknowable. And the thing about unknowability, and I watch this in my friends and myself as well, when you hit a mystery like the first moment of the Big Bang, where the laws of physics break down, your mind just wants to shut off, right? Your mind says, it's too much. It's difficult. It actually hurts my brain. So I'm going to shut off. But I've wondered, those are the areas where you hang around, and that's where you're going to really find wonder. And so to say God is unknowable doesn't mean you can't know anything new about Him. What it means is you can eternally find out more about Him and never reach the end. Right. He's this well that never runs dry. So mystery,
in the same way that life evolves eternally, in the same way the cosmos expands eternally. You know what I mean? I love it. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Yeah. So my idea is that the three miracles of science, the cosmos, life, the human mind, are all analogies of these attributes. And so you look at the Big Bang, time equals 0 or time equals 10 to the negative 43, the universe is a perfect unity. Energy equals mass, and the 4 forces of physics we're finding out were probably all one and the same thing. Everything is this perfect unity, prime matter, but it also resembles the perfect indivisibility of God. And then it explodes out or expands out, and now it's forever trying to reach infinity. Like it's accelerating its expansion. It absolutely blows your mind to try and think about how big the universe is now. Faster than light expansion, and it's just continually going. And so my point is that creation itself is trying to imitate the infinity of the creator, though it will never get there. It'll spend the rest of its life, trying to imitate the creator. And so you see the same pattern in life. If we did start from a universal common ancestor, there's one single cell. So life is a perfect unity with this pure potential to become. And now we have this near, not infinite diversity of things, but the diversity of things is what causes wonder. And the argument is that it's because it's a representation of the infinity of God. You're looking at the diversity of life that you're a part of. And then in the human mind, I talk about the blank slate, the tabula rasa, where the mind at rest is perfectly one. And the mind goes a step further because it's also sort of has this non-physical component. It's your brain plus whatever else it is. And then when you start thinking, you can think almost towards an infinite diversity of thoughts. And so the process of human thinking resembles the Big Bang, and it resembles the life, the development of life.
Absolutely. Man, good stuff, Brad. So listen, we're at about the halfway point, maybe a little more. I want to selfishly start asking you questions that because I wanted to get the gist of this out for the audience, but I have questions that I really wanted to get selfishly to my own. Okay. So if we go to Plato, we just begin with Plato for just a second.
Yeah.
How do you feel about conflating this Platonic idea of form with the religious notion of spirit or soul?
Well, I like it.
Animating principle.
Yeah. And that's what Thomas Aquinas did. Like, he took the form and said it's the soul is the form of the body, the animating principle that animates us. And when it's gone, you're obviously dead. I like the idea. What's your thoughts on it? What have you thought on it?
Well, it's just not, my mind goes there. My mind immediately goes there. And I don't know if that's because of my Judeo-Christian upbringing, but I'm curious if Plato's mind went there, because it's not clear to me that it did. Like, it's not clear to me if I was sitting in front of Plato right now and said, well, you're describing this idea of form. And I explained to him what I mean by spirit or soul. Maybe Plato would understand like daimon or something. Maybe he would think of that concept. But if you asked Plato, is it appropriate to conflate a daimon to form? I don't know that he would say yes.
True, but Aristotle did. Aristotle took Plato's form, and well, I guess he didn't quite say it's the soul, but he talked about soul, I guess, in a different way. Man, that's a good question. I don't necessarily think Plato was thinking the soul when he was writing, but I honestly don't know Plato well enough to tell you that. I don't know. Yeah. I don't have a good enough answer for everything he thought. But my mind goes there as well. I would say that when I think about these ideas, it immediately goes there. And once you hear the idea of form and universals, you go there a lot just during the day. You start thinking about that. Oh, what is the form? Like the whole idea of the 7 habits of highly effective people, like this idea that there are these principles that you can sort of find that have always apply to something. They apply to every civilization at any point, and they would, if humanity was wiped away, came back, they would apply. That's the idea of a universal form, and I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. I may have more questions that sort of bleed into this same topic, but let me just look here. All right. So I just wrote here, you seem to be emphasizing the logical and rational arguments from ancient philosophy that support the existence or reality of the divine without recourse to revelation or supernatural authority. That's kind of what we talked about when we sort of opened. Yeah. And I was just going to ask you why you chose that approach. Do you think it's powerful enough to change the secular mind? But in the interest of time, we kind of covered that. So I'll just move on to the second Plato question here. To what degree would it be overreaching or reading in to connect Plato's forms with something divine? So not just the soul specifically, but something divine.
That's an age-old argument. Yeah. So people talk, he talks about the form of the good. For people that don't know the forms, the form of the good is the highest form It's the one form that unites all other forms. So if you have a horse, it's participating in this perfect form of horseness, but it's also participating in the form of the good. I guess it's the idea that
Your audio went out, Brian. I can't hear you. No, can't hear you.
Hold on one second.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now.
You got it now? Okay.
Now you're back.
Okay. So yeah, you're participating in the form of the good, and the form of the good is this perfect form that unites all the many forms. And it's sort of what religion took to mean God later. But I don't think Plato necessarily meant it to mean God, because what's confusing is he would talk about the Greek gods, the gods of the pantheon. He would use those in his dialogues. And I write in the book, maybe because he saw Socrates die from hemlock poisoning, maybe he, had to toe the line in public. But when he was teaching his philosophers, he kept talking about the forms, and people just sort of took that into religion. But I don't know that he particularly meant it. You know what I mean? But he must have thought about it. How do you not make that connection if you're Plato?
That's a really good point. I think that you're right. You're 100% right. In the Greek world, they were a thoroughly polytheistic society. Everyone sort of accepted that.
Yeah.
So to say the God or the gods, there is no monotheistic idea of God with a capital G in that system. And so Plato didn't have a word for it, because God's already meant something, and it wasn't that. So the form of the good became this organic discovery of God with a capital G. It gives me chills, literally, when I say that. So when I talk about forms and I try to describe Plato to people, what I'll generally say is something like, you see a bunch of different dogs and you recognize that they're all dogs, but they all look different. So what you have here is something in common, dogness, like you would say, something in common about them that allows you to recognize that they're all one thing. So there is a pattern to which they're all a copy of, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so Plato, when he talks about virtues, he talks about the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so the idea is, what is the form that unites the good, the true, and the beautiful? Because there's something there that unites them. And so this all leads upwards to the single notion of this form of the good. Yeah. And this is God with a capital G, in 400 BC.
Yeah, gets me chills too. And it's interesting. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how nominalism, or the idea that the forms don't actually exist. This is more the probably led to the atheist argument. So if you combine nominalism, which says, all this talk of this form that you think you're seeing this pattern, you're just naming it that. It's not really, it doesn't really exist. It's just something we've come up with. And then you couple that with Darwin's discovery that, hey, maybe species weren't created individually like religion used to assume. Maybe species evolved from one cell and developed into all these things. So you can't really say God created all these different kinds. And I think that's the other side of the argument that I think you have to consider. But I find the scholastic realism that ends up in Aquinas to be more satisfying to me. But I couple that with evolution. I don't think, if God creates through a process that takes 4 billion years, why is that a problem? It still ends up with different kinds. The timeline's just different in my mind. So
yeah, I've heard all kinds of people argue about the language of the Bible, and I don't think it's productive. All right, let's see. Where do I want to go next here? Okay, let's see. The form of the good. Okay, this is a quote from the book. The form of the good shares its being with all other forms by giving itself to them. Okay, I love this. The form of the good shares its being with all other forms by giving itself to them. So this is saying that form of all kinds are dependent on the form of the good, are dependent on God. So form is bestowed by that source. But then you say by giving itself to them. And I can't read that without thinking of the sacrifice of Jesus in the story. So God gives his form, being, or existence to the created cosmos. And there's a self-sacrificial motif in there. It's reminiscent of Christ's sacrifice. Yeah. And I wonder what you say about the implication that there's a unity between God and God's creation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I remember writing that line thinking, this is definitely coming from your bend towards Christianity, but let's talk about Trinitarian theology for a second.
Yes.
So the form of the good is sharing its being and existence and intelligibility with everything else. Otherwise, nothing exists and nothing knows what anything else is. So it's sort of pouring itself out constantly. The Trinity is this idea that the Son eternally pours forth from the Father. Not that he was created in time, but that he pours forth eternally and never ending sort of pouring forth, proceeding from. And that the Holy Spirit is then pouring forth, proceeding from the Father and the Son. Or if you're Orthodox, just the Father. But that was the big schism in 1054.
Sure.
So the Son is eternally pouring forth from the Father, and Spirit is eternally pouring forth from the Father and the Son, and then the Spirit is giving glory to the Father and the Son is giving glory to the Spirit and the Father. And so you have this eternal self-gift. I think this is like the most important thing in life. You have the framework of reality itself is eternal self pouring out. And if you want to get your own life right or your marriage right or whatever it is, you need to pour yourself out just like the Trinity does. So I think it's very applicable, but I also saw it in the form of the good, but then you have the Trinity and you have Jesus pouring it out for us on the cross. And also you're kind of caught up in this Trinitarian relationship. Jesus is giving himself to the Father and bringing us with him. And so now when you're baptized into that, you are in this like love relationship that's beyond anything. You are brought into the eternal pouring forth of the Trinity, which is, I'm getting chills just talking about that. But I saw that in the form of the good, sort of like a precursor idea. And I did want to highlight it with that line. So it's fascinating that you caught that.
Yes. I got ideas popping in and out of my mind so much during this conversation. Yeah. So,
you can think about these things forever.
You brought up the Trinity, and I had this image that popped in my head that relates to a scientific question, and it's this idea in quantum physics of the observer effect or wave function collapse. This is the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. And for those people who don't know, in a nutshell, the idea here is that observation, scientists would say, or consciousness, hippies might say, play a role in reality, that things have to be observed in order for them to go from a state of potential or probability into a state of being, into a state of reality. So things exist in both ways simultaneously. And this idea of the Trinity is, this is going to be weird maybe, but I'm just picturing the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they just form this triangle, and they're all looking at each other, right? They're constantly experiencing each other. And something about that is like this perpetual wave function collapse, right? The observation, right? God, and this is linked to what Aristotle said about God being contemplating itself. Yep. God observing itself, collapsing itself into being, right? So this is describing the cosmos as a process within God. I don't know what that makes you think of, but
collapsing himself into being, that's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. But yes. I think that's fascinating. I need to think about that. I'm gonna think about that more. That's fascinating. But yeah, that idea that God can take on humanity after you learn what these Greeks thought God would have to be, collapsing into humanity. That's pretty good way to put it. I think it elevates, if you believe in Jesus, it elevates Jesus. Like, what is this second person of the Trinity that also takes on humanity? Unbelievable. Comes into time out of an eternal state, and somehow is the two, natures united. It's just kind of, it's hard to understand, but it's one of those mysteries, like you said. But no, that's interesting with quantum waves.
While we're talking about mysteries, because I want to move on to Aristotle, but I have to ask you, what do you think? I mean, I'm sure you know this, but Plato was initiate in the Eleusinian mysteries, or one of these mystery schools. I don't know which one. I think it was Eleusis. So Plato would have been one of these people that went to Eleusis, probably took some sort of the kykeon, the potion, maybe a psychedelic potion, and goes through this ritual. So maybe that's new to you, but this is as far as I know, this is historical fact that Plato was an initiate of the mysteries. And I'm just curious what you think about that type of experience and how it relates to his philosophy of forms.
Interesting. No, I didn't know much about that. I did not know. So what type of school was this? What type of mystery was it that he was initiated into?
So this is all secret. It was not supposed to be written about. So there's very little that you can find about it, but there are little hints in the dialogues. So one of the things that he says in the dialogues is like, ye who are not initiates, close the door. And this is one of these phrases that the mystery schools would say. If you're not initiated, you cannot be a part of this. But in Athens at the time, it was a huge ritual. They did it every year, and people would come from all over Greece to participate in these mysteries. And not, like I said, little is known about it. But what the assumption is that there was a it's not an assumption. It's the fact that they drank a potion called kykeon. Nobody knows what was in it, but many have speculated that it was a psychedelic concoction. So people would go and have this secret experience in this temple at Eleusis, while after consuming this kykeon, and in the dark they would congregate together inside this building, and whatever happened in there was something to do with death and rebirth. It was something to do with that. Again, there's a born again analogy here.
Yeah, like a secret society type.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thought? That's where you got the idea of the forms, that from his mind being opened up?
Well, yeah, I don't know. And I certainly won't put you on the spot about this, but I don't know if you have had a sort of a psychedelic experience, but many people who do, not everyone, but many people who do, it has a religious, connotation. For many people, it's life-changing. For many people, it opens them up to the idea of realities beyond the physical. And that's exactly what Plato did, right? With forms. So just curious.
That's interesting. I haven't had a psychedelic experience, but that is interesting that he was part of that. And then he came up with this idea of the forms. I wonder if that is where it came from. Fascinating. I don't know what opens your mind. That's interesting.
I'm not downplaying it by saying maybe it was drug related. One of the things you said earlier is that woman at church who told you that God can speak to you through many avenues, and for Plato maybe it was that. I don't know. I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying that it's a fact.
Yeah, I mean maybe it removes some filters you have up that you constantly can't you can't get down on your own. Maybe it removes some filters to allow God to speak to you in some way. That's interesting. I did have a buddy at seminary that had a similar experience, and he claims his whole conversion was based on that. But I personally haven't had any experience, but I remember one of my buddies talking about that.
Yeah, I've heard that before a time or two. I'll just say I'm in that ballpark. I've always been a believer, but I had an experience that was life-changing, and it happened right before I started this podcast. So this has all been sort of a flowing out from that experience. And you said before how important experience is, but let me move on to Aristotle, because I think I have you for like maybe 18 or 19 more minutes. So all right, so just to quote something that you said here in the section about Aristotle is that Aristotle introduces the unmoved mover. We spoke about that. You say the unmoved mover is a divine being who exists in a non-physical place and transcends the physical world while still maintaining an effect on it, which I thought was interesting, because earlier you talk about how Aristotle talks about form not existing on its own, right? There's no ideal realm. The form exists within the being. So I wonder if there's a contradiction between the unmoved mover being seen as a non-physical entity and Aristotle's insistence that whatever the non-physical is, it only exists in the physical.
It only exists in the physical. Well, I think he thought it was like a pure intelligence type thing, like you've talked about before, this sort of infinite rationality. And that's where he comes up with the idea, well, what you have this being whose pure rationality. He did say it exists like out there beyond the stars or something like that. But I think some of it's confusing. I don't know that it was totally thought out in this perfect paragraph. It's sort of over many different places, but Because he also had unmoved movers, and then he had a singular mover later on. So I'm going with the singular mover because I think that's where he ended up. But the idea is that it's pure rationality, and it's this I guess, mind that doesn't really care about the world, but what is it? It's pure actuality, so it has to be pure activity. What can it be doing constantly? And that's where he comes up with it's pure rational thought thinking about itself, the most perfect being.
Yes.
And that idea was like, gosh, but then his other fascinating idea is how does it have an effect on things if it doesn't care about the world and it's only thinking about itself? And that's where he comes up with this idea of final cause, that all things are drawn to the perfection and beauty of the unmoved mover because of its pure actuality. And we're all trying to actualize ourselves. And because it's pure actuality, it's already there. So we're drawn to become who we're supposed to be just by the virtue of it being there. And sort of it draws us to act out of desire. And I thought that was just fascinating because you could say that about God now as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So in the same vein, there's a quote here that says, since the unmoved mover is not subject to change, it must necessarily be an already perfect being, completely actualized and containing no potential. The unmoved mover always exists in a permanent state of full actualization. So I'm going to throw a wrench at you because I struggle with this idea of God as being fully actualized. I came to the same language that Aristotle uses, potentiality. Yeah. And I use that word as a synonym for God. So in my mind, I sort of see God as potentiality.
Okay.
Now I realize that God is one, right? So if there's such a thing as actuality, then God must be that too. So you've got so the idea of God being a perfect being equals fully actualized. I wonder if we have something that we should consider, like, is God more perfect if it is fully actual and fully potential? In the same way that we would talk about Jesus being fully God and fully man, if that helps at all.
Mm-hmm. What's your idea of God's potentiality? Can you flesh that out more? Like, what do you mean? Sure. What in him is potential?
Well, sometimes I use the phrase "the stem cell of being," that which can become.
Funny, like I use all these ideas in my book. I'm like throwing these same ideas around. Okay, go ahead. Stem cell of being.
Yeah. Okay. So the stem cell of being, that which can become anything that exists. So pure potential is something that can become everything eternally.
Sure.
So I don't know if I can come up with a better description of God, a positive description of God than that.
Well, I mean, I make the argument that, the radiation state is pure potentiality, but is it separate from God, I guess, is the idea. I understand because everything starts in him, so he must have the potentiality to create everything, and everything's moving in a direction. So it's actualizing some potential.
Yes.
I guess my only question there is, how would you say God is potential? Is it in his essence, or is it just in creation that he made that represents him? Because my argument is the creation is an analogy of him, and he made it to be in his image. But you're saying maybe it's part of him, so maybe it's just taking it a step further.
Yeah. Well, if God is one, then as far as I'm concerned, nothing can be outside of him. So the potential and actual must be one thing, in the same way the laws of physics must be one thing.
Right. And we all share existence with him. He shares his existence with us. So we're all sort of part of him. We're all kind of in God. Yeah. Yes.
So imagine this idea of a process again. I was talking about the Trinity and the collapsing function and all of that. So imagine the potential, God as potential transforming into God as the actualized, and this being a constant process. God is a verb. Didn't you say that? Didn't you say that same thing in the book?
Maybe. I don't remember.
I could be misremembering.
He is pure act, so he is action.
Yes.
Okay, so that sounds exactly like Teilhard de Chardin's. Have you heard of him?
I have a few of his books. I haven't read them. They're on my
I have list. The Transformation of Man. I haven't read it yet, but everybody I talk to is like, that sounds like Teilhard de Chardin's idea that the cosmos is evolving towards this omega point, and somehow it's all part of God. But I need to read it too. Maybe we can do another podcast.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm I'm curious. I don't want to. I'm struggling with myself right now about which direction to go with you, but I'm just going to keep plugging through with these Aristotle questions before I get distracted. Okay, so you explain that Aristotle identifies a rational principle
Yeah.
within man, and that's what distinguishes man from other beings, right? This rational principle.
Right.
To what degree do you think Aristotle thought of the rational principle as something divine? Is there
Yeah,
any evidence of that?
I don't think he did. Like I put one line in my book. He's not talking about the soul of religion. He talks about, what is it, de anima, the soul, that a plant has a soul. And what he's trying to say is there's some principle that animates this thing, and he's just going to call it the soul. So he famously called humanity the rational animal, and that defines us. We're an animal, but we have reason and rationality. So he kind of identified that, and he said that's characteristic to the human soul. But I don't think he was talking about an immortal human religious soul, although Aquinas took it to that level when he took Aristotle's levels of being and added in Christianity to it. So I don't know, man. Again, like, how does Aristotle himself not think of that? You just don't know. You wonder what he was actually thinking. It'd be great to sit down with him and ask him what he thought and how it related to the divine. Because I don't know if he thought about that at all or not.
I can't remember who did this, Brian, but I just heard somebody not long ago that trained large language models on Aristotle and a different one on Plato, so that you can have a conversation with Aristotle. You could do the chat GPT thing with Aristotle, you know?
That's awesome. I'd be too dumb to have that conversation. I wouldn't understand.
Yeah. All right, let's think here. We already talked about the diamond idea. Okay, let me just ask you the question that I saved for last, but I really, really wanted to, and I don't know how to like gracefully talk about this, so I'm just going to
launch in.
Yeah, let's just do that. Okay. So Aristotle's conclusion that God is intellect or contemplation, contemplating itself. This idea is what I want to talk about. Now, I told you at the beginning that I've always been interested in the ancients and the wisdom of the ancients, but I avoided Aristotle in favor of Plato because I think that mysticism is an important component to human experience and specifically to religious experience. And I thought that Aristotle was like this prototypical scientist that ignored that. And so I read Aristotle's Politics when I was a teenager, and I never read anything else.
Okay.
So that's kind of where. So coming into this was a new idea. I never read metaphysics. Since I read your book, I have started reading metaphysics, by the way.
Good for you. Good luck.
Thank you. So there's this idea of the image of God that the book sort of circles around.
Yeah.
And we talked about this. The universe contains fractal expressions of God on multiple levels simultaneously, in the universe, in life, and the psyche.
Yeah.
And so that made me think of Hermeticism. And I don't know if you've gotten it, into that study at all, but this idea from Hermeticism that people know is as above, so below. It's this idea that these ancient Greco-Egyptian philosophers, turn of the century, this was central to their philosophy, that I don't know what they mean when they say as above, so below, but I can take a guess that what they mean is something like what we are is something like what God is. So there's some idea similar to the image of God baked into that. So I have more, but go ahead if you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about that, like I talked about with the idea of the Trinity, the self pouring out. I think as above, so below. I think there are these sort of divine principles to God's essence, which apply to the earth. And if you uncover those, or if you discover them and apply them to your life, I think there's real practical application. I was going to tell you too about Aristotle. I don't know if you knew this, but I found this out while researching the book. Did you know he wrote dialogues like Plato?
I did not.
So he wrote a bunch of dialogues that were lost, and we've never found them. And so the reason why Aristotle's so dry is that it's all his lecture notes or the notes from his major students, but his dialogues like Plato were lost. And I was like, man, if we could have had those, that would have maybe added that mysticism, or more his practical application of all these ideas. I would have loved to hear that. But anyway, I just thought of that when you were talking about it.
Sure.
But yeah, I would just assume what you assume, that there are principles in the divine that you can bring down. And I think those principles also structure reality and structure the physical world. and structure how the human mind works. And I just try to talk a little bit about what I see in my book, but I'm sure there's infinite ways that happens.
Yeah. So I guess I wonder the reason that we see the pattern reflecting like that. To me, immediately I think, well, this oneness keeps coming up. So the reason why the patterns that we recognize in God, we see in the world and in ourselves, is because it's the same thing. We're the same thing. The pattern is one pattern. So now I'm getting a little bit, I'm walking a little bit on blasphemous territory. But what do you think of that?
Luckily, we're not in a church council or anything. I think, well, let's think about that story of the Garden of Eden, right? Adam grows up alone, or he's growing up among animals, and he has God, but he doesn't have, he still has this loneliness because he doesn't have the partner. And then he sees Eve for the first time, and finally he is known and seen and loved by someone else. And there's that unity, right? We all desire that. We have that desire for real companionship where someone really knows us and we really know them. And so that goes to the idea of unity. Loneliness is just one of the worst things in the world. Loneliness is just devastating. And the desire to be in communion, can you take it further? We're all going to be one in the body of Christ. We're all going to be one. Well, you take it further, above, so below. The Trinity is that dynamic, is this constant contemplation of the other eternally and infinitely. Yes. And so you see it play out through creation and through our own lives. Yeah, I definitely think there's something to that.
Yeah. Interesting. And so this whole idea of as above, so below, and what God is like, reflecting what being is like, and all that sort of thing. It brings up this idea, this mathematical idea of fractals, and this is something that appears when we start talking about cosmology. Yeah. I remember watching this documentary, and they were talking about how they were trying to make virtual reality landscapes, and they were having trouble because things are so sophisticated and complex in nature. They couldn't make a good mountain look like a mountain in computer generated imaging until they made the algorithms, or what I'm not a computer scientist, until they made however that's programmed, relying on fractal mathematics. The moment they added fractals into the picture, then suddenly the mountains are hyper realistic. So the idea is that there's something fractal in nature, and we know that. You can see, the branching patterns of the river look just like the branching patterns of our lungs and blood vessels, and you can see that sort of thing. But the thing about fractals that's so interesting is that they're created by feedback. So when you look at mathematics that produces fractals, what you have is the same variable on both sides of the equation. They feed back on each other. Gotcha. So if I'm talking into a microphone, into a speaker, I get that terrible feedback. If I'm looking at a video of myself filming myself, I have infinite pictures of me. I get this process of feedback. So fractals and feedback are tied together. And this brings me back to this idea of Aristotle saying that God is mind contemplating itself. I can't help but think of that as feedback.
And fascinating. I think you're onto something there. Because go ahead. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, I'm more interested in what you think, Brian.
Well, that's another mind-blowing question that I'm going to have to think about for another 2 months. That's really cool. What it makes me think of is something I hinted at in the book, but I can't stop thinking about since writing the book, and that is how the infinite instantiates in the particular. How does the infinity of God show forth in the particular? And that's the argument I have for evolution. So evolutionists say, well, it's totally random. Evolution happens. There's no plan. There's no mind behind it. But if you zoom out and you go from single cell to humanity, then you can see a starting and an end point. And I keep thinking, if God is imaging himself in created world, how does an infinite being image himself in the particular? And then I think of randomness. You would get to this. It would appear random if you had an infinite number of options and you're picking a specific path through infinite options. Yes. I mean, unless you turn right every time, it's going to look random. And so, same thing with God coming as Jesus at the year 0 in the Middle East. Why did he pick that time and why that place?
and why the 12 fishermen become the apostles, who all just happen to live in that exact same area. So it's like he does choose the particular, or the Jews. Why were they chosen and when? But that's what it reminds me of, is sort of how did the infinite instantiate in the particular, and what does that look like, and how does randomness play into that image of God?
Yeah. I would be very curious to hear more from you, Brian, as you flesh that out. You know, we have to stew on these sorts of ideas for a while, but eventually some clarity is going to come to you. And I want to know what that clarity is when you find
you got it. You got it.
All right. So just kind of looking at my scribble here. So this idea of feedback, so I told you earlier that I had a mystical experience. It was a psychedelically induced mystical experience. And one of the things that immediately I came to was that I said, reality is God looking in a mirror. Like that's what that was the gnosis. That was the revelation.
I think you're right.
And so I can't help, again, I'm thinking about that, me filming myself, and I see all the fractal millions. This is how the one becomes many. This is a perennial philosophical question. But it's all one. And the Greeks insisted on that, from the pre-Socratics, from people like Heraclitus and Pythagoras and those people, all the way through Plato and the Neoplatonics. You know, you mentioned Plotinus earlier, and Porphyry and some of these people. They all insisted on the unity, a fundamental unity of reality, and the inheritance that we have as Christians. The monotheistic heritage we have, it comes from that. And I just think it's fascinating. And
well, you're giving me some chills, because it reminds me exactly of a problem I was thinking about that Thomas Aquinas sort of solved for me, but obviously it's something you have to think about forever. And he says, well, if God has all these ideas in his mind of each different thing, then how is he one? If there's every idea of creation and infinite worlds, possible worlds, he has all this in his mind, how is he one? And Aquinas said, God knows everything that is as it relates to him. And so he has one knowledge, and it's everything as it relates to him. And so it's just what you're saying. Everything is in him, and everything's contained in him. And so the knowledge, it's not about that thing. It's about how that thing is in me. And so it's one knowledge, because everything is in this infinity. It's mind blowing.
Oh, so I'm gonna end this, because we're right at an hour and a half. I'm gonna end this because what you just said was how it relates to God, and I couldn't help but think that what modern science, like the pinnacle of modern science right now, is relativity theory. Everything is relative, right? And that's exactly what you just described. I mean, quantum science says that space itself might emerge from entanglement or something. It's everything is about relativity. Relative to what? And if that thing is God, that might very well be like the missing link for science, and something that could catapult scientific progress in a new direction in the future. If only we could get people to be open-minded about it.
Amen. Love it.
All right, hang with me, Brian. I'm gonna play the out music.
Okay.
Well, there you have it. That's one avenue explored, but infinitely more still to go. I hope you enjoyed thinking along with us. I know. It's not easy work. Thinking. It's hard and full of uncertainties, but I'm grateful for the company as we trek through this together. Here's to hoping that the juice is worth the squeeze. See what I did there? Let's find out together in the next episode.